I woke up to the familiar hum of the city outside our apartment. New York in all its chaos always felt like home. Claire was still asleep beside me, her dark hair spread across the pillow, the sunlight gently illuminating her face. I couldn't help but smile. At 32, Claire was everything I had ever wanted. Beautiful, driven, and passionate. We had built a life together in this city, one that, at least on the surface, looked perfect. I was a 35-year-old lawyer, successful in my own right, but nothing compared to the way Claire looked at me when I came home after a long day. She had this way of making everything feel right, like I could face anything as long as she was by my side. Our life wasn't all work, though. Claire and I loved our social gatherings, dinners with friends, weekend brunches, the occasional night out at the theater or a concert. We had a rhythm, a routine. And we were happy. Or so I thought. But lately, something had started to shift. It was subtle at first. A late meeting here, an impromptu dinner with colleagues there. I told myself it was nothing to worry about. Claire was a busy woman. She had a high-pressure job in marketing after all. I could hardly expect her to be at my beck and call, especially when she was as successful as she was. But as the weeks passed, I started noticing the little things. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. When I came home, the apartment felt cold. Not literally, of course, our place was always heated to perfection, but emotionally, Claire was distant. And I couldn't figure out why. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was stressed at work. Maybe she was dealing with something personal that she didn't want to talk about. But then there was the growing silence between us. The missed conversations. The empty spaces where affection used to be. I had learned to ignore it, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the late nights or the way she would retreat into her phone whenever we were together. It was the way she avoided looking me in the eye sometimes. The way her voice, once so warm, had become distant, curt. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. It was a Wednesday and I had decided to surprise Claire with takeout from our favorite sushi place. I wanted to reconnect, to remind her of the love we shared. But when I opened the door to our apartment, I was greeted by the sight of Claire's coat draped across the couch and her shoes left haphazardly by the door. She wasn't in the living room, though. In fact, the place seemed strangely quiet. "Claire?" I called, setting the bags of food on the kitchen counter. No response. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom and there she was, lying on the bed, her back to me, her phone pressed tightly against her chest. "Hey," I said softly, hoping to break the silence. "I brought dinner." She turned her head slightly, offering me a weak smile. "I'm not hungry," she replied, her voice distant. I froze. That was new. Claire loved sushi, especially the salmon rolls we always ordered. "Are you okay?" I asked, taking a few steps closer to the bed. She sighed, a sound of exhaustion rather than frustration. "I'm fine. Just tired." But I knew something was off. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. Later that evening, as Claire went to take a shower, I picked up her phone from the bedside table. My heart wasn't racing. There was no rush, no panic, just a nagging sense that I needed to know what was going on. Something in me told me that the coldness between us wasn't just work stress. I unlocked her phone, an easy task since Claire had never bothered to set up a passcode. The screen lit up with a string of notifications from her messaging app. There were texts from friends, colleagues, family, but then I saw something that caught my attention. A message from a name I didn't recognize. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again soon." My breath hitched and I quickly scrolled up, my thumb shaking slightly. The conversation seemed to go back weeks. There were no bold declarations of love, but the tone was unmistakable. Flirty. Intimate. Something I had never seen between Claire and me. I sat there holding her phone, trying to make sense of it. Was this just harmless flirting? Or something more? When Claire came out of the bathroom, I put the phone back on the table, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't say anything at that moment. Part of me was afraid to confront her, afraid of what the truth might mean. But another part of me knew that I couldn't let this go. As I lay in bed that night, with Claire's back turned to me, I realized that whatever had been between us, whatever I thought we had, was slipping away. And I didn't know how to stop it. The questions lingered in my mind, gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Who was this person she was texting? What had happened to the woman I had fallen in love with? I knew I had to find out. I had to confront the reality of what was happening in our marriage. But I wasn't prepared for the answer that would change everything. The next few days passed in a blur. Claire seemed to be avoiding me even more. Her late nights at work turned into early mornings spent glued to her phone. I didn't want to become the kind of husband who checked up on his wife, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't let go. I had to know the truth. I tried to convince myself to let it go, to trust her. But every time I saw her leave the house with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, or heard her typing furiously on her phone, the doubts grew. It was like a silent wall had built itself between us, and I didn't know how to tear it down. One night, after Claire had gone out for a work event that I knew wasn't actually a work event, I sat alone in the living room, trying to focus on a book. But my mind kept drifting back to the messages. I couldn't help it. I had to know. I waited until the apartment was quiet, until I heard the soft click of the door unlocking hours later. Claire came home, her footsteps heavy, and the faint smell of wine on her clothes told me she wasn't exactly coming from a work event. She was tipsy, maybe even drunk. I didn't know what drove me to do it. Maybe it was the frustration of months of distance, or the ache in my chest that had been growing every time I looked at her. But in that moment, I decided I had to confront her. I couldn't stand it anymore. I stood in the hallway as she stumbled into the living room, surprised to see me still awake. "James?" Her voice was slurred, but there was an edge to it, a tension that hadn't been there before. "What are you doing up?" I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, trying to gauge her face, the way she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. And that was when I saw it. The phone. She was holding it in her hand like it was a lifeline, clutching it tightly like she was trying to keep me from seeing something. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Claire," I said softly, the words thick in my throat. "Who have you been texting?" Her eyes widened, her body stiffening as if she had been caught. For a split second I thought she might deny it again like she had before. But then the silence stretched on too long and I knew. She wasn't going to hide it anymore. "James, I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a tremor in her words and I could see the shame in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, it all swirled inside me. I wanted to scream, to shout, but all I could do was stand there, frozen. Claire sighed deeply, setting the phone down on the table. Her fingers trembled as she rubbed her forehead, like she was trying to find the right words. I've been seeing someone," she admitted, the words hanging in the air like a weight too heavy for either of us to bear. I felt the ground shift beneath me like the world I had known was suddenly crumbling. My vision blurred and the room felt smaller, tighter. "Who?" I managed to croak. My voice seemed far away, disconnected from the reality of what she had just said. Her gaze dropped to the floor. "His name is Mark. He's a colleague. A lawyer." "I didn't mean for it to happen, James. It just did." I staggered back as if her words had physically knocked me down. "Mark, a colleague, another lawyer? The man I had never even heard of? The man who had taken her from me?" I felt like I was suffocating. My chest ached and my throat felt tight, but no tears came. Not yet. I couldn't bring myself to cry. Instead, I just stood there, the silence between us deafening. "I never wanted to hurt you," she continued, her voice breaking. "But I didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't about you, James. It was about me. I've been lost for a while now and I thought maybe with him I could find myself again." "How long?" I asked, the words barely leaving my lips. I didn't know if I even wanted to hear the answer, but I had to know. 3 months, Claire whispered, her voice filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, James. I never wanted this." 3 months. That was the moment everything had changed. The person I had built my life with, the woman I thought I knew, had been slipping away from me in small, unnoticed pieces. And I had been too blind, too trusting to see it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The hurt was overwhelming, but something deeper was beginning to settle in, a quiet resolve. I had been betrayed. My trust had been shattered. But I wasn't going to crumble under it. Not this time. "You should leave," I said, the words cold and final. I hadn't meant to sound so distant, but it was the only way I could keep the anger from exploding. "I need some time. To think." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "James, please." "No," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I need you to leave. Now." With a sob, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door closed behind her with a soft click and I was left standing there, alone. The silence of the apartment felt suffocating, like I was trapped in a cage of my own emotions. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let her betrayal destroy everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. I would survive this, and somehow I would find a way to move on. The days after Claire left felt like a fog. My thoughts were fragmented, torn between disbelief, anger, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that clouded my mind. I hadn't expected her to leave so quickly, but I also hadn't known how to ask her to stay. The apartment felt hollow, as though the walls themselves could feel the absence of the woman who had been my everything for the past several years. I spent the first few days in a daze. I tried to keep busy, work, a few drinks with friends, even picking up the gym routine I had neglected for so long, but nothing felt real. The silence in the apartment was suffocating. My thoughts would inevitably drift to her, to the life we had built together, and then to the man she had chosen over me. Mark. The name seemed foreign, like a shadow in the corners of my mind, always lurking but never fully in focus. I hadn't heard of him before. Claire had never mentioned him, and now I realized how many things she had kept hidden. The lies, the secrets, the months of distance. It all hit me at once, overwhelming me with a crushing weight. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I had to confront Claire. I had to understand why she had betrayed me, why she had chosen someone else. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for the answer. What could she possibly say to make this better? To make her choices make sense? I hadn't seen Claire since that night she left. She had stayed at a friend's apartment, and I had been avoiding her calls. The truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what she had to say. But then, on the fourth day, I got a message. "James, we need to talk. Please. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time. Every part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her feel the distance I had felt ever since she stepped away from me. But something, maybe it was the years we had shared or the remnants of love I couldn't quite shake, pulled me to respond. "Where?" "Central Park. Tomorrow afternoon. I'll be waiting." I didn't respond after that. I simply set the phone down, a knot tightening in my stomach. Central Park. Of course. Was our place. We'd spent so many afternoons there, walking hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. It had been the backdrop to so many of our happiest moments, and now it felt like the place where everything would come crashing down. The next afternoon, I stood near the park's Bethesda terrace, my hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, my breath clouding in front of me. I didn't know what I was expecting, whether I thought she might show up and beg me to take her back, or whether I imagined she would show up with some explanation that would make everything make sense. But as I saw her approaching, I realized it didn't matter. Nothing could fix this. Not anymore. Claire looked different. She had lost the glow she once had, her face thinner, her eyes tired. She was wearing a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her coat. She looked small, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The anger I had felt in the days after her departure was still there, but it was muted, replaced by a dull ache in my chest. There were so many things I wanted to say to her, but the words felt caught in my throat. She stopped a few feet away from me, her eyes searching my face, but I didn't give her the chance to speak first. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly despite myself. "Why did you do it, Claire? Why did you throw everything away? Was I not enough?" She flinched at the question, her eyes brimming with tears. But she didn't look away. "James, I never wanted to hurt you. I never thought it would get this far. It was a mistake. All of it. A mistake." I repeated, incredulous. "You've been seeing him for months, Claire. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And you chose him." "I didn't know how to stop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt lost. I thought I could handle it, that I could keep everything together. But I couldn't. I didn't want to admit to myself that I was unhappy, that I wasn't the woman you married anymore. And Mark, he made me feel seen, like I wasn't just a wife or a manager or someone's daughter. He made me feel like I mattered. I shook my head, struggling to process her words. "And what about me? What about everything we built together? Did that mean nothing?" "It meant everything," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "But somewhere along the way I lost myself. And I thought if I found someone who cared about me, really cared about me, I could figure out who I was again. I was wrong, James. I'm sorry. I truly am." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so long, standing there with tears streaming down her face. For a moment I almost wanted to reach out and comfort her. But I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after the way she had shattered my trust. "You had everything with me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And you threw it all away for someone else. I can't just forget that, Claire. I can't just act like nothing happened." She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she wiped her eyes. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." I stood there watching her cry, and for the first time in days I felt the weight of it all, the grief, the anger, the sense of betrayal. It was too much. I couldn't bear it anymore. "You need to go," I said quietly, my words cutting through the air between us. I can't do this with you anymore. Claire's eyes widened and she took a hesitant step toward me. James, please? No, I interrupted, my voice firm now. It's over, Claire. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I can't keep living like this. We're done. She stood there for a moment, her face pale and pained, but she didn't try to argue. Slowly, she nodded, and without another word, she turned and walked away, her figure retreating into the distance. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching her disappear into the crowd, wondering if I had made the right choice. But deep down, I knew it was the only choice I could make. I had been broken. And now, I had to figure out how to put myself back together. The days following that meeting in Central Park passed in a haze. It felt like the world had suddenly shifted beneath my feet, and I was left scrambling, trying to find my footing. Claire had left me with more than just a broken heart. She had left me with a hole in my life that I wasn't sure how to fill. The apartment felt like a ghost town without her. Every corner seemed to hold a memory, a fragment of our life together that now felt foreign. The kitchen table, once the place of laughter and casual conversations, was now empty. The couch, where we'd spent countless nights watching movies or simply holding each other, seemed colder than ever. I spent my days at work, forcing myself to stay busy, to not think about her. But even at my office, the silence of my apartment followed me. I couldn't escape the images of Claire's face, her tearful eyes as she begged for my forgiveness. I had told her to leave, but the pain in my chest was unbearable. It didn't make sense. How could someone I had trusted so completely, someone I had shared my entire life with, betray me in such a profound way? I couldn't answer that question. And I wasn't sure I ever would. One evening, after another long day at the office, I found myself sitting in the empty apartment, my gaze lost in the quiet. The city lights outside seemed to blur together, a distant reminder that life continued moving forward, even when my own world had come to a halt. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over Claire's name in my contacts list. I had sworn to myself that I wouldn't call her, that I would stick to my decision. But I still felt the pull, the urge to reach out, to hear her voice, to ask her if she really meant what she had said. Was she sorry? Or was she just sorry she got caught? I put the phone down without sending a message, knowing that I wasn't ready to hear from her again. Not yet. I needed time. Time to process the devastation. Time to let the wound heal, even if I didn't know how. I spent the next few days in a routine of work and isolation. I saw my friends once or twice, but it was clear that they didn't know how to talk to me about what had happened. They were sympathetic, but their well-meaning attempts at conversation only made me feel more alone. They didn't understand. They didn't know what it felt like to have your entire world turned upside down by someone you thought you could trust. It was during one of these lonely evenings that I found myself at the bar, nursing a drink, when a familiar face caught my eye. It was my old friend Evan, a fellow lawyer I had worked with in the past. Evan and I hadn't spoken much in recent years, but we'd always gotten along well, and I had respected his straightforward, no-nonsense attitude. He walked over, a slight grin on his face. "Hey James, mind if I join you?" I nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Of course. I didn't expect to see you around here." Evan pulled up a chair and sat down, his gaze searching my face. "You look like you've been through hell," he said bluntly, his voice low but filled with concern. I gave a half-hearted chuckle, swirling my drink in the glass. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." Evan leaned in, lowering his voice as if he didn't want anyone else to overhear. "If you're going to wallow in this, James, you might as well go home. You're better off facing the mess head-on." I looked at him, surprised by the harshness in his tone. But then again, that was Evan, always direct, never sugarcoating things. "I don't know if I'm ready to face it," I admitted, feeling the weight of the words. "I don't even know where to start." Evan didn't answer right away. He just took a sip of his drink and studied me for a moment. Then, in his typical no-nonsense manner, he said, "You know, you don't have to figure everything out right now. But you need to make a decision. Do you want to try to salvage your life or let it slip away because of her mistakes?" I flinched at the question, but it struck a chord. What was I doing? Was I going to allow Claire's actions to define me? To hold me captive in this endless cycle of pain and confusion? Or was it time to let go? "I don't know," I muttered, staring into my glass. "I just can't wrap my head around it." "Of course you can't. It's too big to wrap your head around all at once. But you're the one who gets to decide what comes next. And if you keep focusing on her, on what she did, you'll lose sight of your own life." I looked up at Evan, his words finally sinking in. "You really think I can move on from this?" "Of course you can. But it starts with a choice. A decision to stop letting it control you. His words stayed with me long after I left the bar that night. I walked back to the apartment with a heavy heart, but something had shifted inside me. I wasn't going to let this brokenness be the end of me. I wasn't going to be a victim of her betrayal. The next morning I made a decision. I was going to move forward. I wasn't going to forget Claire, and I wasn't going to pretend that what she had done didn't matter. But I was going to stop letting her mistakes define my life. I had my own path to walk, and it was time to start living again. I took out my phone and stared at it for a long moment, then deleted Claire's contact information. It felt final, like a chapter closing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I just was. And with that, I knew. I had made my first step towards healing. The decision was mine. It always had been. The weeks following my decision to move on felt like a long road I had never walked before, uncharted, uncertain, but with a sense of freedom I hadn't expected. I had spent so much time trapped in the past, in the memories of what Claire and I had shared, that I hadn't realized how much of myself I had been losing. But now, with every passing day, I felt myself slowly piecing together the man I used to be. I threw myself into my work more than ever. I threw myself into everything. Projects, long hours at the office, late-night brainstorming sessions with colleagues. But it wasn't just the distractions that helped me. It was the newfound sense of purpose, something I had lost sight of during the years with Claire. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, I found myself walking through the streets of New York again, but this time it was different. I didn't feel the weight of my broken heart. Instead, I felt lighter. The city buzzed around me, and I was just one person in the crowd. I was no longer defined by my past with Claire. I was just James. And that was enough. The following weekend, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time: take a break. I spent the day wandering around the city, revisiting places that once brought me joy. The coffee shop down the street that Claire and I used to visit every Sunday morning. The bookstore we had spent hours browsing, sharing stories and dreams of the future. I smiled at the memories, not in sadness but with acceptance. Those moments had been real, they had meant something. But now they were part of my past. I was no longer bound to them. It was during one of these walks that I ran into someone who would unknowingly play a part in my healing. I was standing outside a small cafe when I saw her, a woman sitting at one of the tables reading a book. She was familiar, and as I walked closer it clicked. It was Sarah, a colleague from one of the law firms I had worked with a few years ago. We had always gotten along, but our paths had diverged after I moved to another firm. "Sarah?" I called, unsure if she would remember me. She looked up, her face lighting up with recognition. "James? Wow, it's been a while. How have you been?" We exchanged pleasantries, and after a few minutes of catching up, she invited me to sit down. We talked about our work, the firm, life in general. It was easy. Refreshing. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people reconnecting over a shared history. As the conversation flowed, I realized something I hadn't thought about in months. I hadn't thought about dating. I hadn't thought about anyone other than Claire. But sitting there, laughing with Sarah, something clicked inside me. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, but the idea of being open to the future, of possibly meeting someone new, didn't seem as daunting as it had before. After we finished our coffee, Sarah and I exchanged numbers. "It's really good to see you again," she said with a smile. "Let's catch up soon. I'll text you." As I walked away from the cafe, I realized how much had changed. The weight of Claire's betrayal was still there, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. I wasn't chasing closure or redemption. I had accepted that sometimes things fall apart, and sometimes the best thing you can do is simply let them go. The next few weeks were a blur of work, reconnecting with friends, and allowing myself to enjoy life again. I wasn't rushing anything. I wasn't forcing myself to be over it. I was just taking it one day at a time, one step at a time. And when Sarah texted a few days later, asking if I wanted to meet up again, I agreed. It felt good to smile at the idea of something new, without the weight of the past hanging over me. I wasn't ready to jump into a relationship, but for the first time in a long while, I was ready to be open to the possibility of happiness again. In the end, the hardest part wasn't just moving on from Claire, it was learning to forgive myself for staying in a relationship that had hurt me. It was realizing that I deserved better. That I deserved to love and be loved in return without fear of betrayal. And that even though the road was long, and at times I didn't know where it was taking me, I could trust myself to walk it. I didn't need to be with Claire to be whole again. I just needed to be with myself.